What if I told you that the most successful traders on Wall Street have mastered a single psychological principle that 95% of retail traders completely ignore? Mark Douglas, the legendary trading psychologist who coached some of the biggest hedge fund managers, discovered a mental framework so powerful that it literally separates consistently profitable traders from those who blow up their accounts. This isn't about technical analysis, indicators, or market secrets. This is about rewiring your brain to think like the market itself. The truth will shock you. If you're struggling with consistency in trading, the most powerful secret lies hidden in Mark Douglas's revolutionary approach to probability thinking that transformed Wall Street forever. Here's the mystery that haunted Mark Douglas for years. Why do intelligent, analytical people, who excel in every other area of their lives, completely fall apart when they start trading? Douglas observed hundreds of traders, engineers, doctors, lawyers, MBA graduates, all with superior analytical skills. Yet they would make the most irrational decisions the moment they entered a trade. The conventional wisdom said it was about discipline, risk management, or finding the right strategy. But Douglas discovered something far more sinister. These brilliant individuals were operating under a fundamental psychological delusion that was sabotaging every trade they made. They believed they could predict and control market outcomes with certainty. Douglas noticed a pattern. The more educated and successful someone was in their previous career, the harder they fell in trading. Why? Because their entire worldview was built on cause and effect relationships, linear thinking, and the belief that enough analysis could eliminate uncertainty. But the market operates on probability, not certainty. This created what Douglas called the trader's paradox. The very mental frameworks that made them successful in life were destroying their trading accounts. The mystery deepened when Douglas realized that some of the most profitable traders he knew had mediocre educational backgrounds, but possessed an almost Zen-like acceptance of uncertainty. The breakthrough came when Douglas realized that successful traders had internalized what he called the 5 fundamental beliefs, but the most crucial one, the foundation that supports all others, was this: anything can happen. This wasn't just a philosophical statement, it was a complete rewiring of how the brain processes market information. Douglas discovered that unsuccessful traders operate from what he termed the illusion of certainty. Their brains are constantly seeking patterns and trying to impose order on random market movements. When they see 3 green candles in a row, their pattern-seeking mind screams, "Fourth green candle coming." This creates what neuroscientists now call prediction addiction. The brain releases dopamine every time it thinks it has found a predictable pattern. But here's the psychological revelation. The market is a probability-based environment where individual outcomes are completely random, even when the overall edge is positive. Douglas used mathematical proof to show that even with a 60% win rate system, you could easily see 7 losses in a row due to random distribution. Yet most traders' brains cannot emotionally accept this mathematical reality. The successful traders Douglas studied had somehow trained their brains to think in probabilities rather than certainties. They didn't try to predict the next trade. They focused on executing their edge over a series of trades. This mental shift eliminated what Douglas called the emotional baggage, the fear, greed, and hope that destroy trading accounts. When you truly believe anything can happen, several psychological transformations occur. You stop trying to be right about individual trades. You become genuinely comfortable with losses, and you start thinking like a casino owner rather than a gambler. This is why Douglas's most successful students could lose money on 5 trades in a row and feel completely emotionally neutral about it. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a professional poker player sitting at a table. You know the mathematical probabilities of your hand, but you have absolutely no idea what cards will come next. An amateur poker player gets emotionally attached to each individual hand, celebrating wins, getting frustrated by losses. But a professional poker player knows that individual hands are meaningless. What matters is playing the probabilities correctly over hundreds of hands. Trading is identical. When you truly embrace anything can happen, you stop trying to be right about individual trades and start focusing on executing your probabilistic edge. You become emotionally detached from outcomes because you understand that losses are simply the cost of doing business. like paying rent for your office. Douglas proved that this one mental shift, from certainty seeking to probability accepting, was the difference between consistent profitability and emotional trading chaos. The market doesn't care about your analysis, your feelings, or your financial situation. It simply expresses the collective beliefs of all participants at any given moment, creating infinite possibilities. If this is blowing your mind, stop right now and hit the subscribe button. Why? Because what comes next will blow up your view on trading psychology and probability thinking. And if you don't subscribe, the algorithm will hide my next secrets from you. But Douglas discovered an even deeper mystery. Even when traders intellectually understood the anything can happen principle, they still couldn't apply it consistently. Their conscious mind would agree with the concept, but their subconscious mind would sabotage their execution. Why was there such a disconnect between intellectual understanding and emotional application? Douglas spent years studying this phenomenon and discovered what he called the internal conflict. The human brain has two competing systems: the analytical prefrontal cortex that can understand probabilities, and the limbic emotional system that's designed for survival through pattern recognition and threat assessment. Here's where it gets fascinating. Douglas found that most people's emotional system was programmed from childhood to associate being wrong with pain, embarrassment, or failure. When these same people started trading, their emotional system interpreted losses as being wrong, triggering fight or flight responses that completely overrode their rational understanding of probabilities. Douglas interviewed hundreds of consistently profitable traders and discovered something remarkable. They had somehow reprogrammed their emotional response to losses. Instead of experiencing losses as being wrong, they experienced them as gathering information or paying for market data. This led Douglas to his most controversial discovery. The traders who struggled the most were often those who had been the most successful in traditional careers. Why? Because their success had been built on being right, making correct predictions and avoiding mistakes. Their identity was literally built around being right, making it impossible to emotionally accept the random losses that are inevitable in probability-based trading. Douglas's breakthrough insight was that successful trading requires what he called emotional neutrality, the ability to remain psychologically detached from individual trade outcomes while maintaining complete commitment to process execution. But achieving this state required rewiring fundamental beliefs about success, failure, and identity. The revelation came when Douglas studied how casinos operate psychologically. Casino owners never get emotionally attached to individual bets because they understand they have a mathematical edge that expresses itself over thousands of transactions. They're not trying to win each individual bet. They're providing a service, entertainment, while collecting their probabilistic edge. Douglas realized that traders needed to adopt this exact same mindset. The most successful traders he studied had transformed their relationship with the market from trying to be right to expressing their edge. They understood that each trade was simply one instance in an infinite series of probability expressions. But here's the deeper psychological revelation. This transformation required what Douglas called ego death in trading. Your ego wants to be right, to predict the future, to control outcomes. But the market demands complete surrender of ego-based thinking. You must become comfortable with not knowing what will happen next, while simultaneously acting with complete confidence in your process. Douglas discovered that this mental state created what he termed the zone, a psychological state where you're completely focused on executing your methodology without any emotional attachment to outcomes. In this state, losses don't feel like losses. They feel like business expenses. Wins don't create euphoria. They're just confirmation that your edge is expressing itself. The traders who mastered this mental state experienced what Douglas called effortless trading. They could execute their strategy with complete mechanical precision because their emotional system was no longer fighting their analytical system. They had achieved complete internal alignment between their conscious understanding of probabilities and their subconscious emotional responses. This is why Douglas insisted that trading success was 80% psychology and only 20% methodology. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if your emotional system is fighting your analytical system, You'll sabotage your own success. Picture a surgeon in an operating room. Every surgery carries risk. There's always a probability that complications could arise or that the patient might not survive, regardless of the surgeon's skill level. But you'll never see a surgeon hesitate before making an incision because they're afraid of being wrong. They've internalized the probability-based nature of their profession. The surgeon executes their methodology with complete precision and confidence, knowing that some patients will have complications despite perfect execution. They don't take complications personally or let previous unsuccessful surgeries affect their performance on the next patient. They understand that their job is to execute their skills perfectly, not to guarantee outcomes. Successful traders operate with this exact same mindset. They execute their methodology with surgical precision, understanding that some trades will lose despite perfect execution. They don't take losses personally or let previous losing trades affect their execution on the next trade. They know their job is to execute their edge perfectly, not to guarantee individual trade outcomes. When you achieve this mental state, trading becomes effortless because you're no longer fighting internal emotional conflicts. You're simply executing probabilities with mechanical precision, just like a surgeon or a casino owner. If you're still watching, you are different from most people. Prove it. Leave your like now and subscribe, because people like you deserve to know all the secrets I'll reveal in the next videos. But Douglas uncovered the ultimate mystery that separates the top 1% of traders from everyone else. Even traders who had mastered emotional neutrality and probability thinking would still hit psychological walls that prevented them from reaching their full potential. They could execute their strategies consistently, but they couldn't scale their success or maintain peak performance during high-stress market conditions. Douglas discovered that these advanced traders were unconsciously limiting themselves through what he called self-sabotage patterns. Despite having overcome their fear of losses, they had developed subtle psychological barriers that prevented them from fully capitalizing on their edge. The mystery deepened when Douglas realized that many of these traders were unconsciously afraid of their own success. They had limiting beliefs about money, success, or their own worthiness that would trigger self-sabotage behaviors just as they were approaching their breakthrough moments. Douglas studied ultra-high net worth traders, people managing hundreds of millions of dollars, and discovered they had achieved something he called probabilistic consciousness. Like, this wasn't just accepting that anything can happen. It was a complete transformation of identity, where they saw themselves as probability managers rather than prediction makers. These elite traders had developed what Douglas termed infinite patience with finite precision. They could wait for their exact setup for weeks without feeling any urgency, but when their criteria were met, they would execute with absolute precision and confidence. They had transcended both fear and greed, operating from a state of complete psychological freedom. The final mystery was this: how did these traders maintain this psychological state during extreme market volatility, massive drawdowns, or life-changing profit opportunities? What prevented them from reverting to emotional decision-making during the most challenging moments? Douglas's ultimate revelation was that the most successful traders had achieved what he called identity transcendence. They no longer identified themselves as people who trade. They identified themselves as pure probability managers. This wasn't just a mental trick. It was a fundamental rewiring of their self-concept that created unshakable psychological resilience. Here's the profound insight. Most people's identity is built around their results. They feel good about themselves when they win and bad about themselves when they lose. This creates an emotional roller coaster that makes consistent execution impossible. But the elite traders Douglas studied had separated their identity from their results completely. They had internalized the deepest truth of probability-based environments. Individual results are meaningless, but process execution over time is everything. This allowed them to maintain identical psychological states whether they had just made $10 million or lost $10 million. Their self-worth wasn't connected to their trading outcomes. Douglas discovered that these traders had developed what he called process worship. They had become completely obsessed with the perfection of their execution rather than their profit and loss statements. They measured success by how perfectly they followed their methodology, not by how much money they made on individual trades. This created a psychological phenomenon Douglas termed the success loop. Because they were focused on process rather than results, they executed their strategies with greater precision. Greater precision led to better results. Better results reinforced their confidence in their process, which led to even better execution. This created an upward spiral of continuous improvement and consistent profitability. But the most profound revelation was this: once they achieved this level of psychological development, trading became a vehicle for personal growth rather than just a means of making money. They were no longer trading to prove something to themselves or others. They were trading as an expression of their mastery over their own psychology. Douglas realized that trading at this level required what spiritual traditions call ego death, the complete dissolution of the need to be right, to control outcomes, or to have their self-worth validated by external results. They had achieved what he called psychological sovereignty, complete freedom from emotional reactions to market movements. Imagine a master martial artist in combat. They're not trying to predict their opponent's next move or control the outcome of the fight. Instead, they've trained their responses so thoroughly that they react perfectly to whatever happens moment by moment. They're not emotionally attached to winning or losing. They're completely absorbed in the perfect expression of their art. Their years of training have programmed automatic responses that bypass conscious thought. When attacked, they don't think about what to do. Their body responds with perfect technique because the movements have been practiced thousands of times. They've achieved what martial artists call mushin, the state of no mind where action happens without conscious thought. Elite traders operate in this exact same state. They've programmed their responses so thoroughly that they react perfectly to market conditions without emotional interference. They're not trying to predict what the market will do next or control their profits. They're completely absorbed in the perfect execution of their methodology. Their years of training have created automatic responses that bypass emotional reactions. When their setup appears, they don't think about whether it will work. They execute with perfect technique because the process has been practiced thousands of times. They've achieved complete psychological mastery, where trading happens without emotional interference. These three secrets reveal Mark Douglas's ultimate truth. Consistent trading success isn't about predicting the market. It's about achieving complete psychological mastery over yourself. When you embrace anything can happen, develop emotional neutrality, and transcend your ego-based identity, you become unstoppable. You stop fighting the market and start flowing with it. The market becomes your teacher, not your enemy. This is the path from gambling to mastery, from emotional chaos to psychological freedom. If these secrets blew your mind, you need to see my next videos, but only if you hit the bell icon. Otherwise, you'll lose the most powerful secrets in history. What is your opinion on the ideas presented in this content? Leave it in the comments. Send this news to that friend of yours who has a keen perception. This content is strictly educational and analytical and does not constitute financial advice or investment recommendations.